Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into something we know many of you are curious about.
Right.
It's this whole idea of using whole flower
Yeah.
cannabis. You know, the dried flowers are for seizure control.
Yeah, especially how it compares to maybe the oils or extracts people hear more about.
Exactly. And our mission here really
Yeah.
is to unpack the evidence. What do we actually know? What's still being researched?
We want to give you the clearest picture possible, looking at research summaries, clinical observations, the lot.
And, one thing jumped out at me straight away.
hmm
There's a lot of chatter about inhaled or even smoked whole flower for epilepsy, but the actual hard science, those big randomized controlled trials, surprisingly thin on the ground.
That's the crux of it, isn't it? We just don't have those definitive RCTs specifically looking at inhaled or vaporized whole flower for seizures. Not yet, anyway.
Okay, so that's the gold standard missing.
Yeah.
But there is some research happening, right? I saw this UK Medical Cannabis Registry study mentioned.
Yes, that's probably the most significant piece of, let's say, real-world data we have right now, published just this April in Brain and Behavior.
Okay, tell us about it.
So they looked at 134 adults, all with treatment-resistant epilepsy. And the interesting part for you is that around 40% of them were using dried flower
40%. Okay. How were they using it?
through certified medical vaporizers. The rest were using oils.
And the results? What did they find?
Well, after 6 months, nearly 30% reported a clinically important improvement in their quality of life. That's pretty good.
Yeah, that sounds promising. What about side effects?
Very low rate, actually, under 4%, and mostly mild things. Safety looked pretty similar whether they used flour or oil.
But here comes the but, right?
There's always a but.
Mm-hmm.
The researchers couldn't actually separate the outcomes based on seizure frequency between the flour group and the oil group.
Why not?
The subgroups were just too small to draw statistically solid conclusions about effectiveness, flour versus oil. So, good safety data, hints at QOL benefits, but not the final word on seizure control itself.
Okay, so that big study gives us pieces, but not the whole puzzle. What about, like, smaller scale stuff, anecdotes?
We do see some of that. There was an Australian chart review. It noted just one adult, mind you.
One person.
One person whose partial seizures dropped by over 50% when they switched from a CBD oil to, interestingly, hand-rolled herbal cannabis cigarettes.
Okay, but just one case. How reliable is that kind of evidence?
Exactly. The regulators rated it as very low-strength evidence. It's a data point, a real-world observation, but you can't base broad conclusions on it.
Right. And wasn't there an Epilepsy Foundation survey, too?
Yeah, that one had about 430 respondents. Some people mentioned preferring vaporized flower for instant rescue when they felt an aura coming on.
Instant rescue, okay. But did they say if it actually reduced their overall seizure numbers?
No, that's the thing. The reports didn't really quantify seizure frequency changes. So it tells us about perceived immediate benefit for some, but not the long-term seizure control picture.
So direct human studies on inhaling flower are limited.
Yeah.
What about the underlying science? Like, how might it even work?
Yeah, this is where we look at the lab work, the mechanistic data. It's quite interesting, actually.
Go on.
Lab studies suggest that getting THC quickly into the system, along with those acidic cannabinoids like THCA, plus the terpenes that stay intact when you vaporize.
THCA. That's like the raw form of THC.
So pretty much, yeah, before it's heated strongly. So THCA, CBDA, the terpenes vaporizing might deliver this whole package rapidly. And the idea, at least in rodent models, is that this burst might mimic the body's own endocannabinoids and help, short-circuit a seizure.
Mimicking the body's own system. That sounds plausible, but I also read about a biphasic effect. That sounds less good.
Ah, yes. That's absolutely crucial to understand. It's a double-edged sword.
How so?
The same brain receptors, the CB1 receptors that cannabis compounds interact with, if you stimulate them too much, especially with THC, it can actually backfire and provoke seizures in some people.
Wow. So more isn't better.
Definitely not. There seems to be this sweet spot for dosing, particularly with THC. Too little might not work. Too much could potentially make things worse. It's a real challenge.
Okay, that makes sense. So given this, lack of slam-dunk clinical trial data, why are some people, and even some doctors, still interested in whole flower? What's the draw?
Well, number one is probably that speed we touched on.
The rapid onset.
Exactly. Getting effects in maybe less than 2 minutes with a vaporizer. If you're someone who gets seizure clusters or feels that aura coming on,
You need something fast.
right, waiting 45 minutes or more for an oil to kick in might just be too long. That quick action is a huge potential benefit.
Okay, speed makes sense. What else?
Then there's the whole entourage effect idea.
Oh, yes, the synergy.
The idea that the raw flower contains this full spectrum, not just THC and CBD, but the acidic forms, THCA, CBDA, various flavonoids, and those more delicate terpenes like linalool or pine that might get lost or changed when making oils.
And the thinking is these all work together.
That's the hypothesis, that the combination provides a more complete or balanced effect, maybe adding some anti-anxiety benefits or other anticonvulsant actions from those other compounds.
A sort of whole is greater than the sum of its parts idea.
Precisely. And another factor is the user experience, the potential for self-titration.
Meaning adjusting the dose on the fly.
Kind of. With vaporization, you can take an inhalation or two, wait a moment, see how you feel, and stop when you get the desired effect, like maybe feeling an aura lessen.
Ah, so you might be able to stop before you feel intoxicated or get too much THC.
That's the theory, yeah. More real-time control compared to taking an oil and waiting to see what happens.
That control aspect must feel empowering.
Right.
Anything else? Cost, maybe.
Cost can play a role, definitely. Depending on the market and availability, especially maybe with some NHS-supplied options like Bedrocan or Curely Flows in the UK, the cost per milligram of total cannabinoids might be lower than some pharmaceutical-grade oils.
Okay, so speed, the full plant profile, self-dosing control, potential cost savings.
Oh.
Those are some compelling points. But now we have to talk about the flip side.
Absolutely. The downsides, the risks, the limitations, they're really important.
What's top of the list?
Dose uncertainty is a big one.
Even with those fancy vaporizers.
Even with metered dose vaporizers, yeah. How much you actually absorb can vary quite a bit, maybe even double, depending on how deep your breath is, how long you hold it.
Hadn't thought about that. So consistency is tough.
Really tough, and that makes it hard to find a stable, effective dose day to day. Plus, it complicates figuring out potential interactions with other meds. Someone might be on stimulants, benzos, that kind of thing.
Right. And what about the THC itself, especially with regular use?
There's a concern, especially with frequent, heavy use of higher THC flower, say, over maybe 0.5 milligrams of THC per kilogram of body weight daily.
What's the concern?
It could potentially lead to the brain downregulating those CB1 receptors we talked about, making them less sensitive over time.
Which could mean?
Paradoxically, it might increase seizure risk on days you don't use cannabis, those dry days. It's like a
Right.
potential withdrawal or rebound effect. This is especially something to watch if someone also uses recreational substances.
Okay, that's a serious consideration. And then there's how people use it. Smoking versus vaping.
Huge difference in risk profile there. Smoking involves combustion.
Burning of the plant.
Right. And that creates nasty byproducts, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, stuff you really don't want to be inhaling.
Why not? What do they do?
They're pro-inflammatory, can damage the lungs, and might even mess with sleep. And poor sleep, as we know, can be a major seizure trigger for many people.
So smoking is a definite no-go from a medical standpoint.
Absolutely. Medical guidelines in places like the UK and Australia specifically advise against smoking cannabis for therapeutic use. Vaporization is the recommended route, if inhaling.
Got it. Any other hurdles? Like just getting hold of it legally?
Oh, yeah. Regulatory and access barriers are still significant. Getting dried flower prescribed on the NHS, for instance, is still pretty rare.
So most people are paying privately.
Mostly, yes. And that can be pricey, maybe £6 to £9 per gram, sometimes more. Plus, getting insurance to cover private cannabis prescriptions can be difficult.
Okay, so lots to weigh up. If someone, after hearing all this, is still thinking about exploring whole flower responsibly, under medical guidance, of course, what are the practical steps?
First things first, be really careful about the type of flower you start with.
Meaning?
It generally makes sense to begin with something standardized and high in CBD but low in THC, like a strain labeled maybe CBD to THC1, which might be around 12% CBD and less than 1% THC.
Or maybe a balanced one.
Or a balanced 1-to-1 CBD to THC strain could be another starting point. The key is usually to avoid those really high THC strains, say over 18%, at least until you know exactly how THC affects you personally.
And the device matters, you said. Vaping, not smoking.
Critically important, use a proper medical grade dry herb vaporizer.
Like the Volcano Medic or Mighty Plus Medic, those ones.
Exactly. Those are examples of devices that have regulatory approval. They heat the herb precisely, usually aiming for below 210 degrees Celsius.
Why that temperature?
It's hot enough to vaporize the cannabinoids and terpenes you want, but low enough to avoid combustion and minimize creating those harmful toxins.
Makes sense. What about tracking? How important is that?
Oh, absolutely essential. You need meticulous records.
Like what?
Log every session,
Yeah.
how many grams you vaporize, the estimated CBD and THC content, timing of any auras, any other substances used recreational or prescribed, and crucially, the seizure outcome.
Wow, it's detailed.
It has to be. That diary is gold for your neurologist. It helps them see patterns and make informed decisions with you.
Okay. And how about the actual dosing strategy? How much? How often?
The mantra is always start micro, build slow.
Like grow.
Tiny amounts. For rescue use, maybe just 1 or 2 small inhalations perhaps, delivering around 5 milligram CBD and just 0.5 milligram THC, then wait 5 minutes. See if it helps the aura. If so, stop there.
And for daily use, like trying to prevent seizures.
Again, small frequent sessions might be better than one big one. Maybe 3 to 6 small sessions spread out, aiming to keep the total daily THC intake low, perhaps under that 0.2 milligram per kilogram threshold we mentioned earlier as a starting point.
Very cautious. Is there anything else practical people should consider?
Yeah, thinking about tolerance buildup, it might be wise to schedule regular THC holidays.
Like taking breaks?
Exactly. Maybe 48 hours completely off every 4 to 6 weeks or so.
Why?
It helps keep those CB1 receptors responsive, potentially making the cannabis work better when you do use it. And it can also help reveal if any subtle increase in seizure activity might be linked to THC withdrawal.
That's smart.
Mm.
And any medical checks needed?
It's generally recommended to get baseline liver function tests, LFTs, and maybe an ECG, especially if you're also taking stimulant medications. And repeat those tests if your cannabis dose changes significantly.
Okay, so wrapping this all up,
Yeah.
where does whole flower fit in the grand scheme of things for seizure management? Is it the magic bullet?
Well, magic bullet is probably stretching it. But for that rapid, on-demand relief and for getting that potential full-spectrum entourage effect, vaporized flower does seem to offer something unique that oils can't quite match. And like we said, many patients do report finding it helpful for those specific situations.
But for the day-in, day-out grind of preventing seizures, where does the strongest evidence lie?
That still points towards the pharmaceutical-grade oral oils, especially those with good clinical trial data behind them, like purified CBD or specific CBD-THC ratios.
So the RCT evidence favors oils for consistent prevention.
Currently, yes. The flower data is interesting, it's promising, but it's mostly observational and often underpowered, as we discussed.
So given all that, what might be the most sort of sensible path forward for someone exploring this?
A strategy that seems increasingly common and perhaps quite pragmatic is a sort of hybrid therapy.
Hybrid, meaning?
Using a consistent dose of an oral oil, maybe CBD dominant, maybe with a little THC for that baseline everyday control, and then having a regulated measured dose flower vaporizer on hand for those breakthrough moments, the auras, the seizure clusters, where you need that fast action.
So using both, but for different purposes.
Exactly. But, and this is vital, always under the guidance of a prescribing clinician.
Because of interactions and monitoring.
Absolutely. They need to oversee the whole picture, watch for side effects, potential drug interactions, especially as you mentioned earlier.
If recreational substances are also involved.
Yes, that adds a whole other layer of complexity. Medical supervision and really honest, detailed self-tracking become even more critical in those cases.
So the final takeaway for someone listening, wrestling with this decision.
Take everything we've talked about, take your detailed seizure diary, take any recent lab results, and have a very frank conversation with your neurologist at your next visit.
Lay it all out.
Yeah. Discuss the potential pros and cons of adding or switching to a regulated whole flower product in your specific situation, considering your epilepsy type, your other meds, your lifestyle. It has to be personalized.
This has been incredibly helpful, really unpacking a complicated topic.
Yeah.
It's so clear there's this gap between patient experiences and the hard scientific data for whole flower.
There really is. We definitely need more high-quality research to bridge that gap and understand its true potential and limitations.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over.
Yeah.
Given that rapid onset and the unique chemical fingerprint of whole flower, what are the most critical research questions we need to tackle next to really figure out its role in epilepsy? And looking ahead, how might cannabis therapy become truly personalized, considering not just seizure counts, but individual biology and needs?
Yeah, lots to think about there. How do we tailor it beyond just seizure frequency? That's the future, hopefully.
Some food for thought indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.